On a day meant to honor sacrifice, one man faced insult instead. The quiet reverence of Veterans Day was shattered in an instant. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus "Gunny" Thorne, 73 years old and a decorated Marine Corps veteran, stood in his full dress blues, perfectly pressed, medals gleaming, as the guest of honor at a small wreath-laying ceremony in a city park. With his hands clasped behind his back and posture still ramrod straight, despite an old limp, Gunny was the embodiment of dignity and tradition. But as the final notes of taps faded into the November air, a figure emerged from a distant group of protesters who had gathered in opposition to recent military actions. This man, young, agitated, and dressed in black, broke through the crowd and stormed toward the memorial. "Your uniform is a symbol of hate," he shouted. Before anyone could react, he hurled a can of red paint directly at Gunny's chest. The contents exploded across the Marine's pristine uniform, bright crimson streaking over dark blue, dripping onto his gloves, his belt, and the gleaming shoes he had polished that very morning. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mayor flinched. Veterans in attendance froze in fury and disbelief. Yet Gunny didn't move. He didn't curse or stumble back. He didn't wipe the paint away. He simply stood there, still at attention, closing his eyes for a brief, solemn second as the cold liquid soaked into his uniform. To Gunny, that paint wasn't just a stain. It was a slap to every value he'd defended across decades of service. He hadn't worn his dress blues that day to seek praise. He wore them for the men who couldn't be there, for the fallen brothers he still honored. The attack was personal, yes, but more than that, it was symbolic. And as the red paint slowly dripped to the polished stone below, one thing became painfully clear. Disrespect, even when thrown by a single hand, could not go unanswered. Still standing at attention with red paint dripping from his dress blues, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus "Gunny" Thorne took a steady breath. He looked neither shaken nor enraged, but inside, a fire had been lit. Around him, murmurs turned to gasps, and the once honorable Veterans Day ceremony dissolved into chaos. The mayor, visibly shaken, stumbled over words of apology. Local police subdued the protester, smirking, self-satisfied, and escorted him to the edge of the crowd. Other veterans clenched their fists in silent fury. Gunny, however, didn't move a muscle. He didn't wipe the paint. He didn't flinch. He stood for something bigger than outrage. Beneath the polished leather belt of his ruined ceremonial uniform, his hands worked with quiet purpose. From a hidden inner pocket, he retrieved a weathered flip phone, a device he kept only for one reason. It wasn't his everyday phone. It wasn't meant for convenience. It was meant for command, meant for crisis. Gunny opened the phone and navigated to a contact labeled Marcom CDO, code red. This wasn't for a complaint. It wasn't for media. It was for when honor had been desecrated and the Corps had to know. And the Corps always answered. He pressed dial. The line clicked once. "Marine Corps Command Duty Officer," came the voice, crisp, precise, unmistakably military. "Authenticate and report." "This is Gunnery Sergeant Thorne Marcus, retired," he replied without hesitation. "Authentication code, Kilo 79er Alpha, reporting a code red violation. Veterans Day ceremony, City Veterans Memorial Park. Civilian protester attacked me with red paint while I was in full ceremonial dress blues. Ceremony disrupted. Perpetrator detained by local authorities. Requesting immediate liaison presence and situational assessment." A beat of silence followed. Then, "Code red acknowledged. Expeditionary forces in the region are en route. Current drill deployment 10 miles from your position. ETA under 10 minutes. Maintain discipline and hold position." "Roger that," Gunny said, his voice low and even. He closed the phone and tucked it away. As he turned, the city behind him continued to stir with unease. The mayor hovered nervously nearby. Police attempted to restore order. The remaining protesters grew quieter, sensing a change in the air. Gunny scanned their faces, some defiant, some confused. It didn't matter. The protester who'd thrown the paint was now sitting handcuffed, clearly unrepentant. But Gunny's focus wasn't revenge. His purpose was the principle. The paint on his uniform wasn't just paint. It was an attack on every Marine who'd ever worn those blues and bled for what they represented. And now, it was the Marine Corps' turn to respond. Gunny straightened his stance again, his jacket stuck stiff with cooling paint. His gloves stained crimson. He didn't feel shame. He didn't even feel anger. He felt resolve. He had made the call, the kind of call that brought the weight of something greater than a single man. A soft, rhythmic thump began to hum in the distance. Then it grew louder. Boots, engines, blades cutting air. The Corps was coming, and when they arrived, the world would remember that Marines don't tolerate disrespect, especially not on sacred ground and never in silence. The first sign wasn't sound. It was silence. A heavy, anticipatory stillness settled over Veterans Memorial Park. The usual city noises faded, as if the world paused to listen. Then it began, a low, rhythmic thumping in the distance. It grew louder with every passing second. Heads turned, eyes searched the skyline. And then they appeared. Two AH-1Z Viper helicopters came into view, skimming low between buildings with surgical precision. Their rotors sliced the November air like thunder, circling the park in tight formation before peeling off into overwatch positions. Almost immediately after, the deep rumble of engines echoed from all surrounding streets. Not police sirens, not news vans. This was something else entirely. From every major artery feeding into the city block, military vehicles surged forward. Humvees, armored MTVRs, and a pair of MRAPs rolled toward the park with practiced coordination. These were not ceremonial escorts. These were fully operational Marine Corps vehicles, part of the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, coincidentally conducting urban readiness drills less than 15 miles away. Their arrival was not symbolic, it was tactical. Within 90 seconds, a complete perimeter was established. Marines in full combat utilities disembarked, forming a disciplined, immovable wall around the memorial. Their rifles remained pointed downward, but their presence was unmistakable. Absolute control. No words were shouted, no threats were issued. The response didn't need noise, it spoke for itself. The protesters who had mocked police minutes earlier fell silent. Even the boldest among them now stood motionless, their signs drooping, their voices caught in their throats. Local law enforcement backed away respectfully, dwarfed both in numbers and in gravity. A Marine captain approached the police commander with firm courtesy. "Sir, the United States Marine Corps is assuming temporary security of this location to ensure the safety of military personnel and the sanctity of this memorial," he said. "We will coordinate with your officers moving forward." From the largest vehicle, a figure stepped down who instantly commanded attention. His bearing was unmistakable, Colonel Davies, commander of the 26th MEU. He cut across the square without hesitation, his eyes locked on the solitary figure of Gunnery Sergeant Marcus "Gunny" Thorne, still standing tall, the red-stained uniform stark against his pristine posture. Colonel Davies reached Gunny and executed a crisp salute. "Gunnery Sergeant Thorne," he said, his voice both sharp and reverent. "On behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I offer our deepest apologies for the dishonor you endured. It will not be ignored." Gunny returned the salute slowly, his hand trembling only slightly from the cold. "Thank you, Colonel," he said quietly. "I made the call because someone had to, not for me, but for the uniform." Colonel Davies turned to address the crowd. His voice carried like steel on air. "Let it be known, the United States Marine Corps does not tolerate attacks on its service members, active or retired. The uniform is not just cloth. It is history. It is sacrifice. And on Veterans Day of all days, it will be protected." And he gave an order to his operations officer: full uniform damage assessment, maximum federal prosecution support for the attacker, and a formal notice to city officials reinforcing veteran protections. Marines at the edge of the cordon ensured the detained protester was handed over for felony-level charges, including hate crime enhancements. The mayor approached, shaken. "Colonel, he began, but Davies raised a hand. "Mr. Mayor, we respect the right to peaceful protest, but this was not protest. This was assault on a symbol of national sacrifice, and I assure you it will not happen again, not while the Corps stands watch." By the end of the hour, Gunny was escorted by a Marine honor guard to a clean, secure vehicle. His ruined blues would be replaced, his dignity reaffirmed in front of the nation. The MEU remained visible for the rest of the day, a quiet warning wrapped in discipline. The message was clear. An attack on one Marine is answered by all, and the Corps never forgets to answer the call. Colonel Davies stepped forward with the kind of presence that needed no announcement. His face was unreadable, etched with the calm control of a leader forged by decades of duty. The moment his boots hit the pavement near the center of the park, the temperature in the air seemed to drop. Marines and civilians alike turned instinctively, sensing the gravity that surrounded him. He made his way directly toward Gunnery Sergeant Marcus "Gunny" Thorne, whose paint-stained uniform still glistened under the midday sun. A crimson insult splashed across decades of honor. The colonel didn't hesitate. He stopped in front of Gunny, looked him squarely in the eyes, and rendered a crisp ceremonial salute. Gunny returned it with quiet resolve. "Gunnery Sergeant Thorne," Colonel Davies began, his voice low but cutting clear through the uneasy stillness. "On behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I extend our deepest apologies for what occurred here today. This uniform," he said, briefly glancing at the red-streaked dress blues, "represents a legacy that cannot be defiled without consequence." Gunny nodded once, keeping his composure, though a flicker of emotion passed through his steel-gray eyes. "It wasn't just paint, Colonel," he replied. "It was disrespect. And it was loud." "I know," the colonel answered, his jaw tightening. "That's why we're here." Without delay, Colonel Davies turned to the city officials and remaining crowd. His voice now rose with quiet authority, controlled, unwavering, firm. "Let this serve as notice," he announced, "that the United States Marine Corps does not turn a blind eye to dishonor. We do not permit the assault of our veterans, and we do not tolerate desecration of our uniform." A few yards away, the protester, now handcuffed and sitting against the hood of a police cruiser, watched nervously as Marines took statements, recorded video evidence, and coordinated with law enforcement. Davies glanced toward him only once, but said nothing. His silence was more powerful than any rebuke. The colonel then turned to his operations officer. "Major," he said, "I want a full uniform damage report submitted to Mar 4 Res before 1700 hours. Calculate the cost of replacement at full ceremonial grade. That bill goes to the individual or the organization he represents. No exceptions." "Yes, sir." "Next," Davies continued, "coordinate with the city prosecutor. Ensure this case receives federal-level support. Hate crime enhancer. Assault on a decorated veteran in uniform. No plea deals. No walkaways." He shifted his focus to the mayor, who stood visibly shaken. "Mr. Mayor, while we respect civil liberties, this city has a responsibility to protect its veterans, especially during designated commemorative events. The failure to prevent this assault falls on both civil and municipal oversight. The Marine Corps will maintain a protective presence at all Veterans Day activities for the remainder of the day." The mayor nodded wordlessly, overwhelmed and pale. Davies wasn't finished. "Inform City Hall that the Marine Corps expects an official public apology issued within 24 hours. Not for me, not for the Corps. For him," he said, gesturing toward Gunny, "and for every veteran who ever wore this uniform." The onlookers, civilians, veterans, and even local law enforcement, stood stunned by the sheer directness of it all. Colonel Davies was not yelling. He didn't need to. His words landed with weight because they came from a place of conviction, responsibility, and unshakable loyalty to his Marines. One of the younger Marines approached with a garment bag in hand. "Colonel, the replacement uniform just arrived from the base," he said. Davies took it and handed it personally to Gunny. "It's not the same as the one you wore today, but it's been tailored to your last recorded measurements. From our quartermaster, with respect." Gunny accepted it, his voice tight with emotion. "Thank you, sir. I never expected this." "Gunny," Davies said firmly, "you didn't have to. That's the point." The colonel gave one last sweeping glance across the park, the red paint on the ground, the stunned protester, the humbled officials, and then nodded to his Marines. "Maintain overwatch. We've finished this day with dignity." And with that, the Corps reaffirmed what it meant to protect its own, not with bluster, but with precision, unity, and the unyielding belief that respect is not optional. It is earned, and it is defended. In the quiet that followed the storm, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus "Gunny" Thorne sat alone in his small apartment, his newly issued dress blues hanging with crisp precision in his closet. The paint had been washed away, the uniform replaced, and the protester charged. But what lingered wasn't just the stain on fabric. It was the message left behind. That day at the memorial had revealed more than a moment of disrespect. It had illuminated the enduring strength of brotherhood, honor, and duty that the Marine Corps lives by, even long after retirement. Gunny never wanted headlines or confrontation. He didn't act for vengeance, but to protect something sacred. His quiet dignity, even under public attack, reminded the world that veterans carry more than medals. They carry memories, sacrifice, and stories that demand respect. And when that respect is threatened, they don't stand alone. The Marine response wasn't just military, it was moral. It said loud and clear, "We do not forget our own." In a world where disrespect can be loud and thoughtless, let us be louder in gratitude and honor. One man in uniform may stand alone, but behind him are generations of courage, and a nation that must never take that for granted. If this story moved you, if you believe that a uniform is more than cloth, and that respect for service should never be negotiable, leave a comment below with the word honor. Share your thoughts, your stories, or a simple thank you to those who've served. And please, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters: courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that hold us together. Let's honor the legacy, one story at a time.